I was 32 years old, sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Costco in Mississauga, eating a granola bar for lunch because I'd skipped breakfast to make a 7 a.m. call with a client in Vancouver. My phone buzzed. It was my sister. "Are you still coming Saturday?" I typed back yes before I even thought about it. Old habit. The thing about my family is that they've never quite figured out what I do. My mom knows I work in finance, which to her means I probably sit at a desk and answer phones for someone important. My older sister thinks I'm some kind of glorified accountant. Her fiancé, I'd only met him twice, had once asked me at Christmas if I liked working for a bank. I'd said I didn't work for a bank. He'd nodded and immediately turned back to my brother-in-law to talk about hockey. I'd let it go. I always let it go. The truth was messier and harder to explain at a dinner table. I'd spent 7 years building a boutique investment advisory firm. We were small, 8 people total, but we managed a portfolio that, by that point, was sitting just under $400 million. Our clients were mostly mid-sized tech founders and a few family offices in Ontario and BC. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. Every client came from a referral, and every referral came because we'd made someone a lot of money without drama. I wasn't flashy about it. I drove a 2019 Subaru Outback. I rented a condo in Etobicoke because I hadn't gotten around to buying yet. I wore good clothes, but not obvious ones. If you sat next to me on the GO train, you would have no idea. My family had no idea. The engagement party was at a venue in Burlington, one of those restored heritage buildings with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a catering team that charged $40 a canapé. My sister had sent a calendar invite that said semi-formal in the subject line. I'd seen it. I'd intended to go home and change after my last meeting of the day. That meeting ran long. It always does when a client is nervous, and this particular client, a founder who was about to take his company public, was very nervous. By the time I wrapped up and drove out to Burlington, I was already 20 minutes late and still in what I'd worn to the office. Dark trousers, a silk blouse, a blazer I'd grabbed off the back of my chair. Fine for a Tuesday afternoon. Slightly underdressed for Edison bulbs and $40 canapes. I walked in, spotted my mom near the bar, and made my way over. She looked me up and down. "You came from work?" she said. "Not a question. Big meeting. I came straight here." She kissed my cheek, but her eyes had already moved past me to someone more interesting. I found my sister. She was radiant, genuinely in a deep burgundy dress, her hair pinned up. I hugged her and told her she looked beautiful because she did, and I meant it. She squeezed my arm and said she was glad I made it, and then someone pulled her away for a photo. I got a glass of wine and stood near the window and watched the room do its thing. I knew maybe a third of the people there. The rest were his family, his friends, his colleagues, a lot of people in expensive suits being careful with their posture. That's when I met him properly. My sister's fiancé. His name was, I'll call him what he is, exactly the kind of man who thinks volume is the same thing as authority. He was tall, well-dressed, confident in the specific way that comes from never having been told no by anyone he respected. He worked in commercial real estate development. My sister had said he was doing really well, which I understood to mean he earned enough to be interesting at dinner parties. He came over with a friend of his, another man in a suit, and he introduced me as Natalie's little sister, which, fine, I am the younger one. And then his friend had looked me over in that particular way and said, "What do you do?" I said I worked in finance. He nodded, the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. "Cool, like at one of the big banks?" "No, I run my own firm." "Oh, nice," he said. "Like financial planning?" "My cousin does that. She does pretty well." I smiled. Something like that. My sister's fiancé had turned back to me then. He had a drink in his hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at my blazer, my blouse, my sensible heels. The assessment took about 2 seconds. "Natalie said you've been really busy." He said, "You should let yourself have some fun occasionally." And then, to his friend, in a voice that was just loud enough, "She works in finance but drives a Subaru." He laughed. The friend laughed. It was the specific laugh of men who think they're being charming when they're being cruel. I took a sip of my wine. I didn't say anything. I've thought about that moment many times since. About why I didn't say anything. Part of it was the occasion. I wasn't going to make my sister's engagement party about me. Part of it was that I genuinely didn't know how to translate my life into something that would land in that room, in that moment, in a way that wasn't just me standing there listing numbers like I was trying to win an argument. And part of it, I'll be honest, was something quieter than that. Something I'd felt my whole life in my own family. The particular exhaustion of having to prove yourself to people who've already decided what you are. I finished my wine. I said goodnight to my mom, hugged my sister again, and drove home on the QEW with the radio off. My firm had been contacted 3 weeks earlier by a development group out of Toronto. They were mid-project on a mixed-use residential tower in Oakville, 40 stories, 160 units, retail on the ground floor, and their original equity partner had pulled out after a zoning delay pushed the timeline back 8 months. They needed to recapitalize. They were looking for $12 million in bridge equity to carry them through to the revised completion date, after which they expected to refinance with conventional debt and return capital with a preferred yield. It wasn't an unusual situation. Construction financing is complicated and delays happen. The project had good bones, the location was strong, the demand fundamentals in that corridor were solid, and the developer had a reasonable track record. My associate had flagged it as worth a conversation, and I'd agreed to take a meeting. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. I was at my desk by 8:30, going through the preliminary materials my associate had pulled together. At 9:55, I was in our boardroom with my associate and one of our analysts when the front desk called up to say our guests had arrived. There were 2 of them, the principal, who I'll call the developer, and his business partner. His business partner was my sister's fiancé. He walked in first. He was in another good suit, carrying a leather portfolio, looking the way people look when they're trying to project competence because they need something. He was mid-sentence when I stood up to greet them, and when he saw me, his sentence stopped. Just stopped. Mid-word. Like someone had cut the audio. The developer, who I would later come to like quite a bit, actually, because he was a straight talker and the situation was not his fault, extended his hand and introduced himself. My sister's fiancé shook my hand very slowly, still processing, and said my name like it was a word he'd never seen written down before. You run this firm? Since 2017, I said. Please sit down. I poured water. My associate handed out the executive summary we prepared. I let the developer lead his pitch because that's professional courtesy, and he did a competent job of it. He knew his numbers. He was honest about the delay and its causes. He had a realistic revised timeline and a credible exit thesis. My sister's fiancé said almost nothing for the first 15 minutes. When the developer finished, I asked my questions. I always have questions because that's the job. You're not there to be impressed. You're there to understand the risk. I asked about the zoning variant status. I asked about the contractor's delay penalty provisions. I asked about pre-sale absorption rates and whether they'd stress-tested against a softening in the Oakville condo market, which had shown some signs of cooling. My sister's fiancé watched me the entire time. At one point, the developer said, "We've been told you've done a few deals in this corridor," and I said yes, 3 in the past 4 years, and walked him through what I'd seen in terms of absorption timing and construction cost escalation. He nodded. He was taking notes. When the formal part of the meeting wrapped up, I said I'd need to do full diligence before any commitment and that my team would be in touch within 2 weeks with questions. Standard language. The developer thanked me, and we all stood up. My sister's fiancé looked at me across the boardroom table. "I didn't know," he said. I picked up my copy of the executive summary. "I know you didn't. Natalie never. She doesn't know much about what I do either," I said. "I don't really talk about it at family dinners." He was quiet for a moment. Then, the comment. "At the party. About the, have a good afternoon," I said. "I called my sister that evening. I want to be clear about something. I didn't call her to get him in trouble. I didn't call her as some kind of move. I called her because she's my sister, and I'd been sitting with something uncomfortable since the party, and the meeting that morning had made it impossible to keep sitting with it quietly. I told her what he'd said at the party. The Subaru comment. The laugh. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How big is your firm?" I told her. Another long silence. "Why didn't you ever say anything to any of us?" I didn't have a clean answer for that. I told her what I told you. The exhaustion, the not knowing how to translate it, the part of me that just wanted to be her sister at a party and not a number on a balance sheet. She said she understood. I don't know if she did. I think she was processing a lot of things at once. She asked me if I was going to do the deal with him. I said I didn't know yet. The deal was a legitimate deal. The project had merit. Whether we moved forward would depend on the diligence, not on him. That was the honest answer. She said, "I need to think." The diligence took 2 weeks. The project was solid, not exceptional. The delay had created some real complexity and the revised yield was tighter than I'd have liked, but the fundamentals were there. I had a conversation with my investment committee and we decided we'd pass. The yield compression didn't justify the execution risk, given where we were in the rate cycle. That was a business decision, not a personal one. I called the developer directly to deliver the news. He was disappointed but professional. He thanked me for the time. I gave him the names of 2 other groups who might be a better fit for the risk profile. That's just what you do. I didn't hear from my sister's fiancé. I did hear from my sister. She called me on a Sunday morning in March and she cried a little, and she told me she'd broken off the engagement. Not because of me, she said. Or not only because of me. She said she'd started paying attention to things she'd been not paying attention to for a while. The way he talked about people, the assumptions he made about who was worth taking seriously and who wasn't. She said she'd realized she'd been doing some of that too, the not paying attention, and it had scared her. I told her I was sorry. I meant it. She said, "You've been successful this whole time and I treated you like you were still 23 and figuring it out." I said I was still figuring it out at 31, to be honest. She laughed a little. We stayed on the phone for a long time. My mom called me the following week. Word had gotten around the family in the way that it does, and she put pieces together and called to ask if it was true that my company managed hundreds of millions of dollars. I said yes. She was very quiet for a moment. Then she said she wished I'd told her sooner. I said I tried to a few times and it hadn't quite landed, and she said she didn't remember those conversations, which is probably true. She asked why I still drove the Subaru. I said it was a good car. She was quiet again. And then, in a voice I recognized from when I was small and she was trying to figure out how to say something important, she said, "I'm proud of you." I don't think I've said that in a while. I had to put the phone down for a second and look out the window of my condo at the gray lake and the gray sky and the CN Tower in the distance, very small on the horizon. "You don't have to," I said when I came back. "I know," she said. "I wanted to. My sister and I have dinner every few weeks now. She took a new job, something she'd been wanting to do for years but hadn't because he'd been quietly discouraging about it. She seems lighter. She asks me questions about my work, real ones, and I answer them. It feels like we're getting to know each other again as the adults we actually are, rather than the versions of each other we'd frozen in place sometime around 2014. The developer ended up finding his equity elsewhere. The project is moving forward. I heard through a mutual contact that it's tracking well. Good for them. Genuinely, I still drive the Subaru. I still eat granola bars in parking lots sometimes when the day gets away from me. A few weeks ago, I was in a meeting, a different boardroom, different city, a founder who was nervous about a different set of numbers, and I caught myself thinking about that engagement party, about standing at the window with my wine, about the laugh, and I thought, I don't know if I'd do anything differently. The not saying anything, the driving home with the radio off. I think I needed that night to be what it was, even the parts that hurt. What I do know is that I don't carry it the way I used to. The need to prove it, the weight of being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best. Some things you earn your way out of, not by making noise about them, just by continuing to be exactly who you are for long enough until the room has no choice but to catch up.